League of Legends has 6 champions who were systematically tortured, and their suffering ranges from brutal imprisonment to centuries of magical enslavement that erased their entire identity. Decade-long solitary confinement in off-the-books prisons to experimental lobotomies performed without anesthesia to being carved apart and resurrected as a beast. These characters endured horrors that permanently destroyed who they were. Today, I'm ranking all 6 from least to most tortured. And the champion at number 1 spent so long imprisoned that he forgot his own name, Graves. Malcolm Graves is the least tortured champion on this list, but that doesn't mean he had it easy. Before you roll your eyes, hear me out. The man spent a decade in one of the most brutal prisons in Runeterra, and the lore explicitly describes it as torture that would have broken anyone else. But compared to what's coming later in this video, Graves got off light, and I can prove it. Graves grew up abandoned in the alleys of Bilgewater, learning to fight and steal before he could read. He eventually partnered with Twisted Fate, and together they pulled off legendary heists across the entire continent. They cracked the Clockwork Vault in Piltover, ransomed Noxian heirs, and lived like kings. Then everything fell apart. During a botched job, Graves got captured while Twisted Fate escaped. And instead of a normal prison, Graves was thrown into the Locker, an off-the-books facility in Zaun, where the torture was completely unregulated. Here's where it gets dark. The official biography states Graves endured a decade of unspeakable misery that would have broken a lesser man. The Locker was run by a Zaunite official named Dr. Aragorn Priggs, and because the prison operated outside any oversight, the wardens could do whatever they wanted. The exact details aren't specified in the lore, but the phrase unspeakable misery combined with 10 years of solitary confinement tells you everything. Graves was psychologically destroyed. The fun-loving adventurer was replaced by an angry, bitter shell consumed by hatred for Twisted Fate, who he believed had deliberately sold him out. The psychological damage was severe enough that when Graves finally escaped, killing Dr. Priggs and stealing his shotgun in the process, he was essentially a death seeker. During the Burning Tides event, Graves fully accepted he would probably die trying to kill his former partner. His trust in others was shattered, his explosive temper got worse, and he operated with violent recklessness that bordered on suicidal. But here's why Graves ranks as the least tortured on this list. He retained his identity the entire time. He remembered who he was, understood what had been done to him, and most importantly, he eventually healed. After being captured by Gangplank and nearly executed alongside Twisted Fate, they saved each other's lives. The resentment began to thaw. Their reconciliation was slow and imperfect, but Graves gradually recovered much of his former personality. He quit smoking, he apologized for his misplaced rage, he rebuilt the partnership with Twisted Fate. That recovery is what separates Graves from every other champion coming up on this list. His torture was brutal and lasted a full decade, but it didn't permanently destroy who he was. Among this group of tortured champions, Graves is the only one who came out the other side still fundamentally himself. His gameplay passive is literally called True Grit, representing the toughness forged through suffering. But it also represents survival. 10 years of torture in an unregulated prison would destroy most people. But at least Graves can still remember his name, unlike the mage who spent 15 years in chains not designed for human bodies. Silas. Silas of Dregborn spent 15 years shackled in chains that weren't built for human bodies, and the mage seekers cut him open trying to remove an organ that didn't exist. Before you think that's hyperbole, Riot developers explicitly confirmed the chains were not designed for human captives, which explains why they're so absurdly oversized and caused him immense physical suffering. But here's what makes Silas's torture distinct from Graves. It wasn't just about breaking him physically, it was surgical, systematic, and designed to extract information from a child who thought he was doing the right thing. Silas was born to a poor family who discovered their son had magical abilities, which in Demacia is essentially a death sentence. His parents were devout believers in the kingdom's ideals, so they convinced their boy to turn himself in to the mage seekers, the anti-magic enforcers who hunted down mages across the region. But instead of executing him immediately, the mage seekers realized Silas had a unique gift. He could sense magic hidden in others, perceiving it as a radiant glow that normal people couldn't see. So they weaponized the child, using him as a living detector to identify secret mages among the populace. For the first time in his life, Silas felt like he had purpose. He was helping Demacia root out dangerous magic uses. He genuinely believed he was serving the greater good. Then everything collapsed when he encountered encountered a young girl hiding her magic. Taking pity on her, Silas tried to shield the child from his handler. He accidentally brushed against her skin and her magic surged through him and erupted outward in an uncontrolled blast. He discovered in that moment that he could absorb and redirect others' magic, an ability he never knew he possessed. 3 people died in the explosion, including the girl and his mentor Marcy. Silas was still just a youth when they sentenced him to life imprisonment. What followed were 15 years in the darkest depths of the Mage Seeker compound, shackled in massive chains of petricite, a magic dampening stone. And this is where the torture gets specific. Those chains were designed to restrain something far larger and more dangerous than a human, which meant they caused grotesque physical suffering when locked around a person's limbs. The petricite also robbed Silas of his arcane sight, his one gift, leaving him sensory deprived in near total isolation. The Mage Seekers didn't stop at imprisonment. They surgically cut open his abdomen, attempting to remove what they theorized was a magic organ located below his liver. They branded the Mage Seeker symbol into his right arm, burning it permanently into his skin. His voice lines reference the physical violence directly. He says, "I had worse beatings in prison, and most hauntingly, I died many deaths in my cell," suggesting repeated psychological and physical breaking over those 15 years. Other mage prisoners were forced to drink petricite elixirs that caused violent reactions, their magic suppressed through chemical torture. But here's why Silas ranks above Graves. The torture was more specific, more varied, and more physically brutal. Surgery, branding, beatings, oversized shackles pressing into human flesh for 15 years, and near total isolation. Graves spent 10 years in hell, but Silas spent 15 in chains that weren't designed for his species, had his body surgically violated, and was permanently scarred with his oppressor's symbol. Yet Silas ranks 5th on this list because despite everything, he emerged with his mind intact. His identity transformed from patriot to revolutionary, but he retained his memories, his intellect, and his agency. He even weaponized the instruments of his oppression, wielding the same petricite chains that bound him. Silas was tortured profoundly, but he was never broken. At least Silas knew who he was after 15 years of chains. The next champion can't say the same because the asylum he was thrown into performed procedures that erased his identity completely. Dr. Mundo was a good man before the asylum destroyed him, and that's what makes his story so devastating. In the 2021 lore rework, Riot revealed that the massive purple Hulk who runs around Zaun claiming to be a doctor was once a friendly, good-natured enforcer working for a Chem Baron. He was physically imposing but known for being boisterous and affable. Quick with nicknames, generous with friendly claps on the back, often blissfully unaware when he stepped on toes. He was, by every account, a decent person trying to survive in a brutal city. His downfall was simple and cruel. He unwittingly angered his employer, and the Chem Baron decided to make an example of him by having him committed to Oswald Asylum, a Zoonite institution notorious for its inhumane treatment and questionable cures. What followed were months of systematic medical torture that permanently destroyed everything he was. The official biography describes the procedures in clinical horror. Nerves were prodded, lobes were severed, and unproved medicines were administered in large quantities. Pieces of his body were surgically removed. Experimental chemtech treatments were injected into him without consent or concern for survival. He underwent lobotomy procedures, neural manipulation, and chemical injections that transformed his physiology beyond recognition. His body mutated grotesquely during the process. His already large frame gained enormous muscle mass. His skin turned purple, his tongue turned blue and elongated to an unnatural length. He developed superhuman regenerative abilities, wounds closing almost instantly, new slabs of muscle regrowing over injuries. He became functionally immune to pain, not through mental toughness, but through the chemical destruction of his nervous system's normal responses. He could regenerate from injuries that would kill anyone else. But the physical horror was nothing compared to what happened to his mind. The biography delivers the devastating verdict with one sentence. His brain, however, suffered a far worse fate. He lost all memory of his past life. He couldn't make sense of the cruel world around him. His psyche collapsed entirely, and in the wreckage, a new personality emerged. Looking down at his restraining jacket, which resembled the white coats worn by doctors, he misread the label upside down as Mundo, and concluded he must be a physician. Everyone around him must therefore be patients in need of treatment. This wasn't a coping mechanism or a conscious choice. It was a complete psychotic break, the construction of an entirely false reality to replace the one that had been destroyed by months of lobotomies and chemical experimentation. And here's where it gets truly horrifying. Mundo began treating everyone in the asylum, mimicking the exact procedures that had been performed on him. The electricity, the lobotomies, the experimental injections. He killed every single staff member and patient in Oswell Asylum, genuinely believing he was practicing medicine. When his former Chem Baron employer returned to collect him, Mundo didn't recognize the man at all. He only saw another patient in desperate need of care. He strapped the Baron to a gurney, performed surgery on him, and added the remains to the pile of bodies on the floor. His official short story, Mundo's Medicul Journal, is written in his barely literate voice and shows him performing brain surgery on a captured person. He's proud when the screaming stops. He's saddened when the patient dies. Mundo ranks fourth because while his torture was shorter in duration than Graves or Silas, the permanence of the damage is catastrophic. His identity wasn't damaged or transformed. It was annihilated and replaced with a delusion. The friendly enforcer who gave people nicknames is gone forever. He cannot suffer consciously because he cannot understand what was done to him, which is itself perhaps the cruelest outcome. He's trapped in a cycle, endlessly repeating the trauma inflicted on him, genuinely believing he's helping people while he murders them. At least Mundo can't feel the constant agony of his condition. The next champion lives in perpetual pain, fused to crude Zonite machinery that's slowly rotting his flesh. Urgot. Urgot served Noxus as its headsman, a high executioner who embodied the Empire's philosophy that strength should rule. His pride swelled with every swing of his axe, and his intimidating presence kept entire warbands in line. He was powerful, respected, and utterly devoted to the system that elevated him. Then Jericho Swain's coup shattered everything. Urgot was sent to Zon on a fabricated mission, and upon arriving, was surrounded by agents working for the Chem Barons. The realization hit him immediately. Everything he believed was a lie. He was dragged down into the Chemtech mines beneath Zon, a hellish prison known as the Dredge. In the Dredge, Urgot was bound in iron chains and forced into slave labor, mining the volatile, toxic Chemtech that powered Zon's industry. The prison was run by Baron Voss, a sadistic warden who offered prisoners freedom in exchange for tortured confessions, then granted that freedom by slitting their throats. Urgot endured the mine's conditions in grim silence, listening to screams echo through the tunnels as prisoners were broken and killed. The exact duration isn't specified in the law, but contextual evidence suggests years of imprisonment. His skin turned sickly pale from extended time without sunlight. He slowly consolidated power among the inmates. The timeline of Swain's political rise supports a multi-year sentence. When Baron Voss finally brought Urgot before her for his own torture session, something extraordinary happened. As her blade cut into his flesh, Urgot realized that his body was already racked with agony, far beyond anything Voss could inflict. The Dredge's daily brutality, the toxic exposure, the crushing labor, the constant violence had already pushed him past the threshold of what deliberate torture could add. His response was laughter. Voss fled in terror. This epiphany transformed Urgot's philosophy entirely. He concluded that pain was Zoon's secret, the thing that forged true strength, not the political hierarchies of Noxus. He began delivering feverish sermons to fellow prisoners, strangling those who wouldn't listen. Then he turned inward and performed the most disturbing act in his story. He systematically identified the weakest parts of his own body and replaced them with scavenged machinery. The augmentation process involved burning and searing flesh to metal, crude Zonite industrial technology grafted onto living tissue. His legs were replaced with 6 mechanical appendages, each concealing a shotgun. His right arm became a machine gun. A tox mask was fused to his face, connected by tubes to his mechanical lower body, venting pure alchemy so he could breathe. The physical description of post-augmentation Urgot is nightmarish. Rotting flesh where it meshes with metal, sickly pale skin, labored breathing through his chemical mask, an enormous mechanical chassis supporting what remains of his human torso. He chemically burns the insignia of every Chem Baron he kills into his own flesh as trophies. His voice lines confirm the constant suffering. Pain is the act of becoming. You cannot know strength until you are broken. Death could not break me. The man exists in a state of perpetual agony. The rotting interfaces between flesh and metal, the chemical breathing apparatus forcing toxins through his system. The crude mechanical limbs that tear at organic tissue with every movement. Urgot ranks third because his suffering combines extreme duration, devastating physical transformation, and permanent ongoing agony that never ends. Unlike Mundo, Urgot is fully lucid and aware of every moment of pain. But he embraces the suffering as philosophy, which paradoxically makes it both worse because it never stops, and more bearable because he finds meaning in it. He started a prison riot that cracked open the dredge, escaped into Zaan's underbelly, and became the Dreadnought, a philosophical anarchist who uses the same chains that enslaved him to execute those he deems unworthy. At least Urgot chose his augmentation and found purpose in his pain. The next champion had no choice at all when a mad chemist carved him apart and resurrected him as a beast. Warwick. The man who became Warwick was once a Zoanite gangster who tried to reform himself, a violent man who put down his blade and took a new name to live a better life. In Arcane, he was revealed as Vander, the adoptive father of Vi and Jinx, a respected community leader who ran a bar called The Last Drop. Then Singed, the mad chemist, abducted him. Warwick was designated subject number 1088 in Singed's notes, meaning over 1,000 subjects had already failed before him, their deformed bodies dumped in Zon's sump. The experimentation documented in the official story Engineering the Nightmare reads like a horror medical journal. Singed drilled through Warwick's shoulder blades for several minutes to attach an alchemical chamber and pumps. He threaded delicate hoses throughout Warwick's extremities, splicing them with veins and arteries. The subject, the notes record, wailed and pleaded, insisted he was no longer a monster, but a good man. Singed ignored the distractions. Warwick remained conscious and screaming for 6 hours straight. When the transmutative formula was finally activated, his blood vessels constricted, his body convulsed, and a jagged shard of bone ripped through his wrist. He wrenched against his bindings until the joint cracked sharply and his severed hand fell to the floor. But here's what makes Warwick's torture uniquely cruel compared to everyone else on this list. Singed enhanced Warwick's healing abilities with chemicals, meaning he could inflict progressively worse damage knowing the body would repair itself, only to be cut open again. The biography states this plainly. Though the chemicals enabled Warwick's body to heal through most of the physical damage, his mind was shattered by the unending agony. Singed carved, reshaped, and reassembled Warwick over an extended period. Flesh split like poorly seamed fabric. He coughed up caustic phlegm that burned holes in the laboratory floor. His skeletal structure fractured and reformed. When the final transmutation pushed too far, Warwick briefly broke free and attacked Singed, scarring his face before collapsing. All indicators of life faded. Singed dumped the body in a charnel pit atop the corpses of previous failed subjects. But death proved to be the true catalyst. The chemical chamber on his back began to pump. His body contorted, bones bending and snapping, teeth growing, sinews tearing and healing with alchemical glow. Dead flesh replaced by something new and predatorial. By the time his heart started beating once again, the man Warwick had been, and the lives he'd lived were gone. What remains is a creature in constant torment. A chemical chamber bolted to his spine floods his veins with liquid fury whenever he feels rage, fear, or hate, which is nearly always. The smell of blood triggers involuntary frenzy, overriding whatever fragments of human consciousness survive. His memories surface only as flashes immediately overwhelmed by searing echoes of the operating table. His voice lines capture the horror of partial awareness. The man I was, I killed him first. I want to forget everything. Every time I hear a scream, the memories come back little by little. Warwick ranks second because his torture represents the most graphically intense physical suffering of any champion on this list, combined with near complete loss of humanity and permanent ongoing chemical torment. He exists in constant physical pain, driven by involuntary chemical rage, haunted by fragments of a life he can barely remember. And the enhanced healing that allowed Singed to torture him indefinitely makes his case uniquely cruel, a body engineered to survive unlimited suffering. He was drilled, carved, chemically reshaped, killed, and resurrected as a beast that cannot escape the agony of what was done to it. At least Warwick's torture lasted months, maybe a year at most. The final champion was imprisoned for so long that he forgot his own name, his home, and why he ever came to the mortal world in the first place. Vhagar. Before Mordekaiser found him, Vhagar was everything a Yordle should be. Curious, enthusiastic, and eager to learn. He had left Bandle City, the mystical, spiritual homeland of the Yordle race, to study celestial magic with an order of human mages in the Noxie territories. He taught them to draw hope from the patterns of the stars. He was an innocent, knowledge-seeking creature, exploring the wonders of the mortal world. Then the undead warlord Mordekaiser and his armies swept across the land, crushing all opposition. The mages in Vhagar's order were unskilled in war and of little value to the tyrant. They were put to the sword. But Mordekaiser's keen eye fell upon Vhagar, and he recognized the Yordle for what he truly was. He snatched him up in one iron gauntlet and dragged his prize away while the others were slaughtered. Vhagar was imprisoned in the heart of the Immortal Bastion, Mordekaiser's monolithic fortress. What makes his imprisonment uniquely devastating among these 6 champions begins with a single biological fact. Yordles are spiritual beings who can traverse between the physical realm and Bandle City. Mordekaiser bound Vhagar to the physical plane, severing his connection to his home and preventing even the possibility of spiritual escape. The official biography identifies this isolation as the worst and most cruel form of torture for a Yordle, a species-specific cruelty that has no equivalent for the human champions on this list. The torture was multifaceted and relentless. Vhagar was forced to perform grisly enchantments against his will, dark magic that strengthened Mordekaiser's dominion or simply evoked terror for its own sake. His celestial gift, once used to map patterns of hope in the stars, was twisted into a weapon of destruction and domination. He was made a reluctant witness to Mordekaiser's atrocities, watching in helpless horror as the warlord's vile deeds empowered him toward near immortality. He was tortured specifically to extract knowledge about other realms. He was used as an instrument of terror, forced to inflict suffering on those who opposed Mordekai's reign. The lore describes relentless torment and manipulation until his spirit began to fracture. The duration is what elevates Vhagar's case beyond all others. The official biography states, whether it was over the course of decades or centuries, Vhagar never knew. Timeline analysis from the lore community, based on Mordekaiser's second reign of terror, estimates the imprisonment lasted centuries. He lost track of time entirely. His memories faded like the last flickers of light before an eclipse. He forgot why he had come to Valoran. He forgot where he was from. He forgot he had ever known any other life. The psychological destruction was total. His magic and appearance twisted in response to the relentless darkness. By the time Mordekaiser's own followers conspired against him and ended his reign, Vhagar was nigh unrecognizable. His eyes blazed. Even his voice had become a sneer of malice. The curious, hopeful Yordle was gone, replaced by a creature who had absorbed his captive's personality. The lore community notes this may constitute Stockholm Syndrome. Vhagar modeled his entire post-freedom identity on Mordekaiser, styling himself as an evil sorcerer and dark overlord. He defeated a warlord named Vixis the Cruel, seized Bolham Tower as his fortress, and dedicated himself to villainy. Yet here lies the final, most heartbreaking dimension of Vhagar's torture. He cannot actually succeed at being evil. His Yordle nature, the fundamental goodness Mordekaiser could warp but never fully destroy, keeps surfacing. Brigands are driven from woodland hideouts. Feral wolves are found scattered in town squares. His crimes amount to scorched pastures and razed mansions. In his official short story, villagers storm his tower to complain about soured milk, and the village leader gives him a sympathetic wink. The official description states that even though he believes himself truly evil, he possesses an inner morality that leads some to question his deeper motivations. He is trapped between who he was, which he cannot remember, and who he wants to be, which he can never fully achieve. Centuries of torture left him a caricature of his torturer, forever performing evil he can never perfect, yearning for a peace he can never access. Graves spent 10 years in prison and eventually healed. Silas spent 15 years in chains and became a revolutionary. Mundo lost his identity, but can't comprehend his loss. Urgot lives in constant pain but found philosophy in it. Warwick was carved apart and resurrected as a beast, but Vhagar spent centuries imprisoned, had his memories erased, his soul rewritten, and even freedom couldn't save him. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.